Displacement exacerbates poverty. Conflicts drive hunger. COVID-19 disrupts health services. And great lockdowns worsen the education gap. On September 25, 2015, member states of the United Nations adopted the 17 Sustainable Development Goals by 2030, with a view to ending poverty, fighting inequalities, and tackling climate change. Now, 6 years later, are we on the right path? Experts predict biodiversity loss could cause more frequent and severe pandemics unless we make transformational changes together. So how will science, technology and innovation help us chart the course into the future?
I'm here to sound the alarm. The world must wake up.
While striving to leave no one behind, what partnerships do we need? Coming up on the Dialogue Special, Technologies for Sustainable Development Goals.
Hello and welcome to a special CGTN dialogue on technologies for sustainable development goals. I'm Xu Qianduo. Actions must be taken, so it's said, before it's too late. 6 years into the Agenda 2030, where are we now in achieving those goals? How can technologies help us to close the gap to achieve those SDGs, ranging from biodiversity to inequality? Today, I will talk to a group of scientists, experts, and entrepreneurs who have been working tirelessly toward that end. I'm honored to be joined by, in the studio, Mr. Chen Hong, CEO of the Hana Group, and online by Dr. Rachel Chikwamba, Group Executive of the Council for Industrial and Scientific Research of South Africa, Professor Guo Huadong, Director General of the International Research Center of Big Data for Sustainable Development Goals, Dirk Franzer, Managing Director at the Flemish Institute for Technological Research, and Dr. Gong Ke, President of the World Federation of Engineering Organizations, and Mr. David de Schutter, Global Vice President of the Innovation Center at AB InBev. This program is co-produced by CGTN and the Global Sustainable Technology and Innovation Community. Thank you all for joining us. Rachel, why don't we start with you? With 9 years left to achieve this UN SDGs. So where are we now? Are we still on track or are we off track?
Good afternoon, and thank you for having me on the program. I would say that we have made some progress, but certainly we have cause to be concerned. I think that there is areas where we really need to accelerate progress. And for me, these issues include things such as literacy, where we have about 1 billion people, adults and children, still not literate, where we're looking at education, where, half of about 57 million people of primary school age are still not being educated. And when we talk about no poverty and no hunger, the statistics are not very flattering for us. So acceleration is required.
Chen Hong, so from your observation, where are we now in terms of following through those SDG goals there?
I saw a video by UN General Antonio Guterres when he spoke at the UN. I think clearly the message I'm getting is that clearly we have a goal, 9 years to go. However, with the pandemic, with the instability of the regional politics and others, and also the global, we call it economic differentiations of different countries, etc., and trade barriers, etc., I think it create a lot of challenge for the goals to be met in 9 years. So I think we need to work very hard to make sure that we work together as different nations work together to pursue the same objective, is to make sure that we get to the goal as close as possible.
Well, Mr. Franzer, sitting in Europe and looking at this global situation, do you also think like we need to somehow to speed up probably our work to achieve those goals?
Yeah, I follow the logic of Rachel. My thinking is we are on the right track, but not on the right speed. We are on the right track because look at the number of countries which have inscribed themselves in the SDGs, but also large companies. AB InBev is with us, But multinationals, Microsoft is going to work on climate and on water-related issues. So worldwide, you see that multinational companies really take SDGs to heart. So from that point of view, we are on the right track, but clearly the speed to achieve that by 2030, I don't think we will make it. Now, if I look at what happened with the Millennium Goals, we didn't achieve the Millennium Goals either, yet we made enormous strides. So I think that will happen also with the SDGs. It will be a pity that we will not make them, but the intent to make significant and important strides towards the end goal by 2030, that should be the minimum that we can achieve.
Mm-hmm. Professor Guo Huadong, what's your take of the same question? Like, maybe somehow, like, probably we are behind the goals, and maybe we will not be able to achieve the goal at the right time. Shall we try our best anyway?
It's really only have the 9 years left. We have the great challenge. But I agree that the pandemic has affected our progress globally. According to Sustainable Development Report 2021, the COVID-19 pandemic has impacted our 3 dimensions of sustainable development. However, at national level, there are also success stories in different goals and targets in different countries. For example, according to our assessments of 6 SDGs in China, the achievement is optimistic. We can say of the 20 indicators we have evaluated recently, China is closer to or had met 4 already. Between 2015 and 2020, none of the indicators worsened in China. Mm-hmm. This is why there is a growing realization of the importance of science, technology, and innovation, and public education and make progress, even both geographically and between different SDGs.
Yeah, that's why we are talking about that. And I want to ask Mr. Shooter. Obviously, technology is one of our focus here in this session. How can technology help maybe speed up to reverse the trend, or simply accelerate the trend to realize those goals?
Yes, I have a strong belief that science, technology, and innovation can bring the answers to the problems that we see. So as a global head of R&D at AB InBev, so I'm fortunate to be surrounded by brilliant minds that are working together to create solutions that actually develop a better world. And if you bring those prominent problems to them, they will provide the answers. So I can give a few examples of what we have developed in the last couple of years. So we have actually been managing to use our spent materials, so spent grains from the brewing process, which is the leftover from the brewing process, that was actually going to waste or to cattle feed. We've actually been able to dissect it as being very nutritious protein and fiber material. We could actually upgrade it, upcycle it to plant-based protein. And plant-based protein is very important. So we're able now to provide ingredients, very high quality ingredients from our spent material from the brewing process, actually to create new nutrition for millions of people. So that's one of our accomplishments. If you put the problems there in front of the scientists and the technologists, you know, and I'm confident that they will be able to provide the answers as well. And that's why I'm very optimistic that the pressing need will also create the technologies for the future.
That's very encouraging to listen to those words, and hopefully that's we are talking about how the technology and the science progress could help us to deal with some of the problems. One of the goals, of course, biodiversity, number 15 SDG. There are some shocking number I would like to share with our viewers here. Like this, the Wildlife Fund discovered that the wildlife populations have plummeted on average by 68% since 1970. And for the wildlife population in the freshwater, the decline was a staggering 84%, equivalent to 4% every year since 1970. And so when we talk about explore the causes, they say 1/3 of the land is agriculture, and 1/3 of all food is lost or wasted. And human activity is thought to be causing species to disappear 1,000 times faster than the natural rate. Some scientists call the sixth mass extinction. So how technology, Mr. Chen, can in a way help maybe reverse or slow down the extinction of the species, for example?
Yeah, technology right now, what's happening lately is that I think with the advent of the big data, algorithms, and computing power, the artificial intelligence, so actually the people are able to use technologies, for example, to trace the the wild species and to monitor constantly the environmental impact of the land and in the forest and everything else. And also can use the data to process and to count and to even help to create solutions and to make sure that the wildlife and the species are protected. So I think the technology today play a very, very important role, in my view, to deliver the promise of the SDG. Of course, technology has its counterpart, that is could be creating the root of the exclusion and inequality. But overall, I think the technology now plays a very, very important role of really helping us to solve a variety of problems.
Mr. Franzer, how do you see the role of technology in protecting biodiversity, in protecting those species from, say, going extinct?
I've got the same thoughts as the previous speaker. Based on two axes, if I may say so. One is indeed in agriculture. I think if you look at, for instance, the amount of food produced per hectare, there's a huge difference worldwide between the amount of food that you get from the same surface, whether you are in Africa, China, or Western Europe. So exchange of even already existing technologies and existing methods can greatly help. Second, and there big data and what we call the digitalization of agriculture will play a significant role. And the second part is biotechnology. We will see that using biotechnology we will be able to produce food which is in places where it is thought to be ineffective for the moment on one thing. And also the question was to reverse the decline. I think the first step of the technology will be, hopefully will be to halt the decline. If you wanted to reverse it, then biotechnology and basically gene modification could ultimately, but many years from now, could ultimately make the species which has disappeared come back again. I don't know whether that is something we really want to achieve, but it will certainly be something which in 5 to 10 years from now will be more possible than now.
But that's, anyway, encouraging development, whether we apply those technology to the reality or not. Professor Guo Huadong, I know you have been heading a project on the big Earth data. We mentioned about the data. In your institution, can you please share with us, how the project has been bridging science and research with, the biodiversity ecosystems, the protection?
Recent years, we have done a lot of work on utilizing big data to study biodiversity and ecosystems at both macro and micro scale. For example, we utilize big data to map biodiversity and answer where the diversity hotspots are, what species should be protected, and how to protect them. In addition, we proposed a new framework to combine ecological niche model and AI-based model for species identification. And we developed AI-based mobile apps, which have been widely used in China and contribute greatly to the community. Furthermore, we developed the criteria and the scheme of the classification for 3 conditions of the conservation and sustainable use of biodiversity. Based on the finding, a proposal was made to specially optimizing the conservation and management of biodiversity. I can say, these services will contribute greatly to the advancement of biodiversity science, providing fundamental information for fulfilling the national obligations in implementing the Convention on Biological Diversity. Is my idea.
Very helpful. Rachel, I want to ask you the question about seems it's like a gap. You have the technologies often lie in the developed countries, but biodiversity often is concentrated in the less developed, least developed countries or developing countries. How can they share the technology to better protect our biodiversity? The ecosystem there.
Thank you very much for the question. You are absolutely correct that the richer parts of our world in terms of biodiversity also coincide with the poorer parts of the world with respect to access to technology. So I want to build on what the last speaker has presented, which is how do we make sure that there is benefit sharing from biodiversity? And as part of the incentive to benefit share from the process that come out of beneficiation of biodiversity, we should then make sure that there is investment and sharing of technology by those that have access to it, in lieu of also being able to access the benefits. It seems that at this point, it feels kind of skewed that there is a benefit sharing mechanism that's supposed to be theoretically supporting the sharing of biodiversity, but the process are not being equally shared. So technology is something that we need to access, and it can be availed, and it can also support how it is that we can conserve the biodiversity. I want to give an example of something that we do here in South Africa. So much as there is a general understanding that there isn't that much of technology in the developing world, we have developed situational awareness technology at my organization, the CSIR, which has allowed us to protect rhinos from being poached in the Kruger National Park, which is one of the largest wildlife parks. We also have technologies for Earth observation, which are critical for me when we think about how can we preserve germplasm and biodiversity in a rapidly changing ecology. And I feel that these technologies are not just technologies for developed countries to have. We need to communicate about them, and we need to develop skills and capability bases in the developing world to allow us to use technological tools to preserve and conserve germplasm, to be able to track and trace it, and to be able to benefit share with others. Thank you.
But if you look at the COVID-19, the impact is huge. For example, 2019, I think 2020, the FDI, foreign direct investment, plummeted by 42%. So, Gunke, I want to ask you, how this, loss of funding or this dwindling of funding somehow affect this. I'm not sure whether that affects the funding for the science and technology projects. How can we make sure that our research will not be affected?
That's a very good but hard question for me to answer, and I think that's a real problem. That's one reason why I say we are not on track, because the promised funding has not yet been reached, implemented. For example, for the new technology, to transfer this technology to developing countries and the least developed countries, they need some funds to support these kind of activities. And also to build the capacity of developing countries needs also funds. So for international collaboration, for example, if we merge our efforts on a big Earth data from all countries, there are some funds is required. So we do need more funds to fund these kind of activities to accelerate the delivery of SDGs. However, I think the very urgent action we'd like to carry out is the Green Foundation for climate change. That's a most urgent task for, especially for the wealthy countries, for developed countries, to realize the commitment they have made 6 years ago in Paris to establish this fund urgently and use it effectively in developing countries as early as possible.
Mm-hmm. Well, hopefully, we can hold the governments, accountable to make true their commitment to the Green Fund. It comes back to the entrepreneur level. I want to ask Mr. Chen. Hana Group, for example, I do a lot of investment, I know. Mm-hmm. When you are investing in technology, do you have this SDG or the climate change in mind, and how to do it?
Yes, I think we call it responsible investment. It is something where we all bear in mind. For example, we are in the private sectors, and we're trying to use our money to create and help the entrepreneurs to create great companies and utilize the great technologies to enhance the development of we call sustainable development goals. For instance, we invested into agriculture, automation, and auto driving company. Actually, that can be deployed into the countryside and help the farmers to improve the productivity. And we also invested into one of the leading Chinese, we call it hydrogen battery company, mm-hmm. that will allow you to use the hydrogen as a battery, and we call the renewable energy, put into cars and like EV, and to move forward. And something which we are very proud. Those kind of creating the clean technology. On the other side, we call we're talking about quality. We call inequality. There might be a lot of we call low-paid, we call the delivery guys and boys of logistic companies. We invest into a very large logistic companies. They employ over 1 million people, and they pay all the benefits, insurance, social security, and everything else. And employees are their employee rather than just being an outside consultant. Those kind of things are all related, I think, to social responsibility, which a company or private company or investment firms can do.
Also SDGs here.
Yeah.
Well, Rachel, as the previous speaker mentioned about this gender equality is also one of the SDGs. Obviously, some people believe that in the community of the science, the technology, because there are a lot of women working in this area, actually it's easier to reach that goal, equality between men and women. But if you look at this general job replacement and job opportunity in the society, some would say it will take 267 years to close the gender gap in this general job placement and opportunity. What do you make of that? 267 years? That sounds unbelievable.
And totally unacceptable. In my part of the world, we have in South Africa, about 33% on average is the proportion of women who work in science, technology, and innovation institutions. So people are actually working in research and development. Yet when you look at it closely, there is about 51% enrollment now in institutions of higher learning and universities by women. So there is something that is happening there, and there is a change that's coming. But you don't see that translate to the women opportunities being granted to women to actually take science, technology, and innovation jobs, and to translate this into women leadership in society. So for me, I think that is quite unacceptable. When you also look at the situation of women in my part of the world, up to about 70% of them who are employed in the informal sector. And there is very little technology support that is being given in that space. And I believe that truly we are not making the most that we can of technology to actually help benefit women participation in that particular economy, formal and informal economy. Like it or not, we have women in our part of the world being also the bulk of the players in agricultural primary production. How do we use digitalization of agriculture, as a colleague mentioned earlier, to make it easier for women to farm? How do we create technologies that take out drudgery from usual farm operations so that women can participate enthusiastically in the market economy that's associated with the space in which they are playing now? But lastly, I would like to believe that we are losing a lot of opportunity by not making women at least 50% or more, 51% of the workforce and the workforce leadership, especially in technology-driven enterprises and technology-driven institutions.
Mm-hmm. Obviously, I mean, technology can be very positive in promoting the gender equality, empowering women, as Rachel has mentioned. But also because of the COVID-19, I guess, even before COVID-19, according to this estimate of International Telecommunication Union, for example, the access to the internet, only 4 billion people, they have the access of the internet. 3.7 billion, basically, they are still disconnected. And also there's a gender gap. For example, in 2019, it is estimated, 55% of the male population was using internet compared with 48% of female population. And the regional disparity too, you see there, in Europe, for example, more than 80% of the people obviously have access to the internet, but in Africa, like about 70% they don't have access to the internet. Well, Dr. Gongke, what can we do to narrow this gap? If you look at this pandemic, obviously it worsened the situation in terms of the disparity, for example, the access to the internet. That means actually the access to quality education, decent jobs probably, you can work remotely. If you don't have access, you have to be in person to do the job, usually probably low-paid jobs over there. Obviously, empowerment of technology for those people who are unlucky, let's say, is very important. What do we need to do? Because the pandemic obviously is still ongoing. Maybe after the pandemic or following the pandemic, is there anything we can do to level the playground, let's say?
Yes, actually, during the pandemic, in the past 1.5 years, we see digital technology, telecommunication, especially mobile telecommunication, mobile internet, helps countries and people to access their job, to access their education, their courses, and so on and so forth. But as mentioned above, a lot of people, they don't have access to the internet. So very important issue is infrastructure. We need infrastructure in the less developed countries, especially in the continent of Africa. So for that purpose, we need investment again. We need financial tools to build up these infrastructures. And we also need localized engineering solutions. And we need local engineering capabilities, capacity building again. These are urgent issues for the world to reduce the inequality of the development, to achieve the overarching goal of the sustainable development. That means left no one behind. Mm-hmm. So infrastructure in developing countries, especially in least developed countries, is an urgent task for all of us.
Well, we are talking about infrastructure development and overall economic development, for example, in developing countries as well as in developed ones. But at the same time, when we talk about the climate change, we want to less polluting, less wasteful, ways or pathways of development. But I want to go back to Francois. Is that possible for the developing world to avoid this? The old pathway in the past 100 years, basically practiced by the developed world. You have a polluting, you have a wasteful way of production, let's say.
We have to and we can, both of them. If you look at where in, let's say, Western Europe we come from, 100 years past, you wouldn't want any developing country to start with the technologies we were using 100 years ago. I mean, what they will do is they will adopt as soon as possible the technologies we have access to today. So that means that in developing countries will leapfrog in a sort. That has for us, if I may say so, also a disadvantage. It is called a disadvantage of the fact that we are running ahead. And that as a term, it actually makes us more slow in adapting new things, because we have been using old stuff for the last 20, 30 years. And so if you can start anew and look at, for instance, the PV panels discussion, the solar energy, it is much faster adapted for the moment in the entire Middle East than everyone thought possible. While in Europe, a lot of countries hardly have solar panels or hardly have access to wind. So I believe, it's not a belief, I mean, it is clear, you will not sell all technology to developing countries. First, it makes no sense. Second, they don't want it. The new technologies are simply much better. So from that point of view, I'm quite optimistic. The other thing is, and that's why we are advocating what we call integrated technologies, is that there are a lot of technologies available which in themselves might not be very effective money-wise, but if you combine them and you look at multiple SDGs at the same time, I think we can advance there, certainly in the developing countries. Why? Again, for the same reason. And a lot of times in Europe, we are hindered by existing legislation to adapt new things. The example David was giving of reusing waste, you don't want to know how much headaches and legislation that takes to reuse waste as a new raw material in Europe or in Belgium. Well, that can be done like that if you want in India or in South Africa or wherever, but it takes years to have it passed. Why? Because we have existing legislation which actually prohibited for the last 30, 40 years of using waste. We wanted to get rid of waste. We didn't want to put it back into the cycle. So the whole thing the world has to go through, for us, might even be more difficult than for the rest of the world.
I wonder, Rachel, your input about, like developing countries. Some people would say, pollution first, treatment second. That's probably unavoidable way for developing countries to go in terms of their economic growth.
So I think this is a very important and in some ways sensitive topic. I agree with what Dick has put on the table, that there is no reason for us to use old technologies where, there are newer, better and greener technologies. But sometimes there is challenges that we face with respect to the technologies that bring us to doing certain things faster. So one of the issues that is quite hot is the topic of energy in the just transition, where you find that we look at the abundance of fossil resources and then say, why do we need to really rapidly do something different when in fact we still have an energy source that's there? There is hope though that we're seeing more and more our countries saying, much as we have potentially readily available energy from old and dirty sources, we want to do things differently. And so you see us in countries like South Africa and others looking at the potential of, solar energy, the potential of wind energy. The important thing being about really what we want is to be able to create energy sources that support fair regional development, creating good quality jobs, and making sure that there is good trade-offs when we choose those and incentives when we choose those methods of generating energy that are more sustainable. For me, I think that it doesn't help to say, those that are developed got there using polluting means, because it might in fact justify not doing the better thing, which is to focus on advanced and greener forms of energy. For me, that's a zero-sum game where we say those that are developed polluted, so we have a right to pollute. The question is, how do we be supported to actually adopt greener ways of doing things, greener ways of generating energy? And in fact, I think it is important for the developed world to be seen to be doing a lot more in terms of cutting out things like emissions, greenhouse gases, and all these things in recognition of that path of development that they followed. And so I think that's the way to go. But we need to see also developed countries do more in mitigation of damage done to date.
Mm-hmm. It seems like there is a requirement of partnership, from developed world and the developing countries there. But also, I think even in other sectors, there's international cooperation. Professor Guo Huadong, you are the director of this newly founded International Research Center of Big Data for Sustainable Development Goals, which actually set up in September this year, aiming to facilitate the implementation of the SDGs. Please tell us, how the center is helping, to enhance the international cooperation in order to achieve the 2030 UN agenda.
It's my great honor. I was appointed the founding director of this the center. Well, the center is called CBARS. CBARS was set up to provide a range of services essential for addressing the most challenging problems, such as the lack of data and the technology barriers in the implementation of the SDG. Anybody in the world, you're welcome to participate in our activity. Why? Because, we will, the CBARS develop, SDG data infrastructure and information products. The infrastructure, everybody can share for this. And we will provide a new knowledge for SDG monitoring and evaluations, and to provide a capacity, development for SDG in developing countries.
For a part of the, technology or science cooperation, I guess it's easier for, scientists from different countries to work together. But when it comes to technology transfer from developed world to developing world, it could be controversial, could be challenging. Mr. Shooter, like this pandemic, U.S. said, we give up the patent of the vaccine, by Pfizer and by other companies. But we know it's a long, complicated process, and it takes time to really have a production center or have the developing world somehow to master the technology and produce a vaccine for themselves. So that's, besides some other countries disagree with that practice, what exactly, the right way to do in a situation like a pandemic? Shall we share all our technology? We invested a lot in that?
Oh, we agree that there needs to be some kind of IP regulations to make sure that of course the companies that invest in growth, that invest in innovation, that they also get some return on investments. But on the other side, we need to make sure that we also look at the bigger picture. And if we're really talking about global problems to solve, then we should treat it differently. And I can give an example of what we did as ABMF as well. So we developed a sustainable technology, which was called in our brewing process, the simmer and strip technology. And this technology allows us to actually brew in the boiling process, during the brewing process. It actually consumes almost no energy. So we've been able to create a process step that actually reduces the evaporation rate and hence also the energy consumption during the brewing process almost completely. So it reduces our carbon footprint with 5% if we implement it globally, just with one process innovation. And of course, looking at the bigger picture, this was a tremendous innovation for the brewing industry. We didn't want to keep that for ourselves because in the end, it will help the brewing industry to reach the SDGs. And that's why we decided to open up the patent for free to all the small and medium brewers, and of course with a small license fee for the bigger brewers. And I think that's a way we could actually make sure that the big companies that still invest in the R&D, but also be able to share that benefit as well with the smaller companies. And I think that's a possible way to approach it. That's the way that we have approached it, and maybe some other companies can also follow our example here.
Mr. Tianhong, obviously, where is the balanced approach? On one hand, you have the innovation because of your investment. Of course, you are entitled to seek some profit from that kind of innovation. But at the same time, in particular in this pandemic situation, this is a moral obligation, seems to me, for companies basically to share what they have to save peoples around the world.
Yeah, I think I agree with you. I think in the sense that I think in a normal sense, IP is very important. You invest the money and capital and everything else, and it should be yours. However, in this very special situation of global crisis, human crisis, I think kind of coordinations between the private sectors and government can be achieved so that actually the undeveloped countries can receive a lot of benefit, probably not free maybe, but very cheaply, or maybe donated by somebody through a charity, etc., to really help them to recover from the pandemic, get back to normal life. One of my colleagues over here said that you need to invest into infrastructure. But I think the infrastructure is right over there right now today. In the last few years, you need to look at the technology advancement on we call it reusable energy. Solar and wind has become much more advanced, number one. Number two, distributed, we call it energy, reusable energy, through the IoT technologies, etc., putting them together as consistent energy resources are there. The third that I still remember when China 40 years ago was very poor, was undeveloped country at that time. And China would import the used equipment, from the telecommunications or from the foundries, others, and then use them to get started and gradually upgrade the system. But if you look at today's we call it mobile infrastructure, the 5G is we call it 5G towers, transmission towers, is very, very expensive and also energy consuming.
That's right.
However, 4G has been put aside, not being used, thrown away. Why don't you, two countries or others, can work together to take the 4G, which is still very powerful today, can do a conference like this, and offer them to the undeveloped countries, build up the infrastructure, right? So that's something where we'll get people connected. So I'm much more optimistic to see at least one area that is broadband and the internet to achieve the agenda 2030 to be achieved, because if we do a lot of collaboration.
Franz, sir, I'd like to have your opinion. Seems Mr. Chen mentioned about this, if not completely, at least partially, we can share some of the equipment, some of the technology. I remember basically the idea of giving up the patent for these vaccine producers basically is supported by the US, China, and other countries, but European countries basically says they disagree with such a practice.
A number of things. I agree with the previous speaker that the revolution or the evolution on digital pathway will happen much faster. Also because it's easier to to transport it, but also to manipulate it. Then in terms of what we should avoid, I think you should avoid what we happen now is that the youth in Europe is looking at YouTube, but not for education. I hear a very optimistic approach. They can watch the best professors. Actually, they could also look at the best professor on the internet here in Belgium, but it doesn't happen. They look at YouTube movies and vloggers, and I don't think everything which is being said there is scientifically even correct. The discussion on the vaccines, I think of course, it's a human disaster. At the same time, and I think a lot of very correct statements have been made. I just want to add one more. That is that if you look at the vaccines of Pfizer and Moderna, the technology which is protected there by IP allows much more than simply the vaccine production. If you have IP on a certain technology, which only covers that specific technology, it's easier to transport or to liberate. If you working with some of the technologies which are underlying the Pfizer and the Moderna vaccines, you're actually talking about the future of pharma for the next 10 years, 10 to 15 years. It is going to revolutionize entire medicine. I think based on the technology which is underlying there, probably we will have eradicated most of the cancers in 10 years' time. So for those companies giving away that they're basically putting a mortgage on their next 10-year future by doing so. So it's much more, and that is a pity, of course. It is much more than helping to alleviate the problem that we have at hand. It's in a number of cases based on the type of IP. Not all IP is the same. Based on the type of IP, it could prohibit them, or it would hamper further development. On the other hand, it is clear that a much larger and a much faster availability of vaccines is needed for COVID-19. And so we should do everything we can to expedite that. It doesn't make sense that Europe is sitting on millions of vaccines which are simply not used. It doesn't make any sense at all. So the discussion whether we now need a third booster or not, well, a lot of millions of people don't even have a first vaccine shot, is a complete waste of discussion, if you ask me. Mm-hmm. Yeah? And so those things should be a bit more equilibrated one to another. Mm-hmm.
Well, obviously it's a big topic, but before we conclude this session of discussion, I want to have your final words of this technology and the role of technology in achieving the SDGs. We'll start with Franz, please.
Well, I mentioned it very briefly, but I didn't go into it, but I would like to come back on it now. We strongly advocate what we call integrated technologies. That is trying to tackle, and I think that David has given some examples, trying to tackle multiple SDGs at the same time. It seems to be counterproductive. If you would say, well, if we tackle one SDG, it's going to cost us money. If we tackle 2 or 3, it's going to cost us 2 or 3 times. No, it's not the case. On the contrary, by trying to look at several problems at the same time, and trying to tackle that, the solution of one or the waste of one can be a solution for the second one. And in that case, you get a very healthy business case. And a very healthy business case means it is being taken up very, very fast. So then that is what we call integrated technologies. Look at it from that way. And then the other point is, why doesn't it happen more? Because those technologies exist or they are in the making. It is because companies, most of the companies, not all, most of the companies have over the years focused very strongly on what they said, this is our core business, and all the rest has been given out. And that means if you come up with technologies which integrate multiple SDGs, then whose core business is it? So if you look at a very integrated company like AB InBev, well, they are in a position to integrate this because it's simply their nature of doing that. While if you look at another company like an energy company, the only thing they can do is shift from energy production A to energy production B. And basically that is a sort of linear business model which will be out of date. And so my appeal to this is look at integrated technologies, tackle more SDGs at the same time, and also go away from linear business models and more in a comprehensive, in a holistic way of looking at your business like we used to do 20, 30, 40 years ago.
Good to hear that. And Dr. Gongke.
I would like to say, because the scientific, technological, and engineering society plays a crucial role to achieve the SDGs. So we have to closely work with all stakeholders to shoulder our a greater responsibility to achieve the SDGs. And I was very encouraged by the Tokyo Olympic. So I would like to say to promote the technological innovation and to harness the great potential of technology to implement the 2030 Sustainable Development Goals with the Olympic spirit, faster, higher, stronger, and together.
We're uplifting. Mr. Chen?
Yeah, I think I think the technology potentially has really the power to really help us to deliver the SDGs in a timely manner.
In a joint manner.
Yeah, a joint manner. It is not by one country to do something in their own country. It is a worldwide proposition. So I think let's work together and to put everybody together and really to achieve that objective.
David? Mr. Shooter, yeah.
Yeah, yes. I would like to use a phrase that Albert Einstein used to make. So you can't solve problems with the same kind of thinking that you used when you created them. Yeah. So that's why I strongly believe that science, technology, and innovation will help us to solve the problems and the pressing world's challenges. And of course, you cannot innovate in a vacuum. So you need to have problems to solve. And that's actually what all those scientists, technologists, and innovators need to know is really what are the big pressing problems that the world faces. And that's the SDGs. And I think that's how we link our purpose together with the innovation power of the scientific and technologist world. So I'm very optimistic in that sense. But of course, companies nor governments can do it on their own. So we need to all work together. Governments, companies, big and small, startups, all these communities. And that's what we as ABM try to do. And it's linked to our company's purpose. We want to bring people together for a better world. And we strongly believe that innovation is a teamwork from all the different parts of the world. And we advocate that.
Yeah, thank you. Professor Guo Huadong, your final word?
For technology for SDG is really the good topic. Without the STI, without the SDG success, let's continuously keeping to use the science, technology, and innovation to facilitate the sustainable development goals. Thank you.
Thank you. And Rachel?
Thank you very much. For me, I think that prior to the COVID-19 pandemic, we didn't have such appreciation for science, technology, and innovation. We used to call it expenditure on science, technology, and innovation. Now, investment in science, technology, and innovation. So that's the one thing. But associated with that closely, we made strides in dealing with the pandemic because we treated it as an existential crisis for humanity. When you look at the things that we try to address with the SDGs, we need to treat them with the same kind of agency and to appreciate the role of science, technology, and innovation in actually, in a focused way, accelerating how we achieve them.
Thank you, Rachel, and thank you for joining us on the exploration of the role of technology for achieving UN Sustainable Development Goals. With 9 years left, let's hope for the best. This has been a special CGTN dialogue on technologies for sustainable development co-organized with G-STIC. I'm Xu Qianduo. Thank you for watching.